Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Moms Talks Sex podcast. I'm your host, Maura Yelvington of Morph Transform Your Reality, where I help women step out of trauma and reclaim their power. I'm so happy to have you here for this open conversation about moms, sex, motherhood, children, relationships, marriage, and everything in between. So grab your drink of choice and let's dive in. Happy that you're here today, and I'm honored to have the beautiful Emily with me. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Well, thank you so much for coming to our show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell our guests a little bit about you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Cleghorn. I am a life reclamation coach. When I'm not working, I'm the mom of two beautiful little humans and the wife to my husband, my best friend. And we are living the farmstead life in Canada. So there's lots going on, and so I help trauma surviving mamas step out of who they were told to be in their trauma and awaken and align with who they were created to be. So that is my focus.
I love that. So maybe you can share a little bit about your story and how you got to that place in time, and how you became more aware.
Yeah, so my story really begins when I was 6 or 7 months old. My mom abandoned me and gave me to my paternal grandparents. From there, she was in and out of my life whenever it was convenient for her. And I lived with my paternal grandparents until I was 6. At that point in time in my life, I was really close to my dad, and my dad was getting remarried, and I wanted to go live with him. So my grandparents okayed it, and I went to live with my dad, my stepmom, and my stepbrother. During that time, I lived with them for about 18 months, and I was abused as physically, emotionally, mentally, and sexually by my stepmother and stepbrother. During that time, after a while, the adults in my life knew about the abuse. They knew what was going on, but they never advocated for me. They never stepped up and said, hey, enough's enough. You can't treat Emily this way. And it went on until the November after I turned 7. So my birthday is in August. So my birthday came and went. I was at my mom's for the weekend in November, and she told me to go get my stuff packed up so that I could go home. And something snapped inside of my little 7-year-old body, and I decided that I was not going to go home. So I went into my sister's room and I packed up my stuff in my bag, and I hid under my sister's desk. And I was small enough, I was scrawny enough that I could fit into the chair hole in the desk. It was one of those retro kind of computer desks. And I put my bag in front of me so that nobody could see me. And I sat there for what seemed like forever to my 7-year-old self. You know how your sense of time is off as a kid. And my brother came in the room looking for me. He said my name. I never answered him. My sister came in the room looking for me. She hollered for me. I didn't answer her. My mom came in the room looking for me. I didn't answer. they were looking for Emily. Where did Emily go? She went in the bedroom. Where did she go? Eventually my mom noticed that my bag was in front of the desk and she moved it, and she's like, what's going on? I said, I'm not going home. I'm not going home. And so she got on the phone with my dad. She's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Emily says she's not going to go home. And so he got on the phone with my grandmother. He's like, Mom, I don't know what to do. Emily says she's not coming home. Anyway, that night I went back to live with my paternal grandparents. And that was that. Then all through my teen years and my early 20s, I dealt with a lot of anxiety, some depression, thoughts of giving up, because I felt like I didn't matter. I felt like I was a waste of space and I didn't matter. Yeah. Then when I graduated from high school, I decided that before I even had graduated, that I was going to leave and go as far as I could away from where I grew up. So at first I was comfortable going 4 hours away from home. I did my university education, and then I moved across the country as far as I could. And that gave me a brand new opportunity. I was in a brand new community. Nobody knew me. They didn't know my family. They didn't know my past. And I could essentially forget. Yeah. I could bury it and I could forget about it. And then I met the man that is now my husband, and we started dating. And he didn't know much of my past. He didn't know that I was sexually abused as a child. And I didn't tell him at the best possible time. Kind of surprised the pants off of him. Anywho, so we decided after we got married in 2016 that we would start to try and have a family. And we struggled with infertility. And through that process, I learned a lot about how my stress response was impacting my female hormones, the hormones that you need to reproduce. And I've done a lot of healing work around that aspect of my life, enough so that now I have 2 kids. Yeah. But when my daughter was born in 2018, all of that trauma that I just mentioned, that I was able to bury and repress and run away from, well, it came out of the grave. And it was like a freight train that hit me and side railed me. And so not only was I dealing with the unfamiliarity of being a mom and dealing with the transition of going from not a mom to a mom who also has a traumatic childhood in her rearview mirror, and dealing with the postpartum hormones and all of that baloney that nobody tells you about, to also figuring out and navigating my stress response that was telling me to run because I felt unsafe. And I had to make a decision. I had to decide to listen to it or to stay. Listen to it and run and cause my daughter the hurt that I had experienced by my mother abandoning me, or stay, fight, and figure it out.
Yeah.
So I chose to stay and navigate that darkness. And so when I was walking through that, I was silent at first. I felt like there was something wrong with me because I hated being a mother. I felt like my daughter would have been better off with somebody else as her mother. And those thoughts that I was having run through my mind and nag at me made me feel like a horrible person. And I was judging myself worse than I think anybody else could judge me. So I stayed silent and I suffered by myself in silence. I didn't even let my husband in until, I think it was 2 or 3 months that I suffered in silence. And he knew something was up because I would cry at the drop of a hat for no apparent reason. And he kept asking me, dear, what's wrong? Dear, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And I kept saying, oh, nothing, I'm fine. I'm just incredibly emotional. Until one day I opened up and I let him in and I say, I hate being a mother. I hate it. And it took me a really long time to realize that I am not my mother and I have the power to make new choices. And that my mother was doing the best that she could with what she had at the time, with the tools that she had at the time. And I have the ability to get different tools and to work through it in a different way. And that realization really changed things and it opened things up. And as I was going through this, I was scared to mention anything to my doctor because I was scared that they would label it as postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety and just slap a prescription on it.
Yeah.
When I didn't necessarily need a prescription, I needed to gather the tools that I didn't have so that I could work through the stuff that I didn't have the tools to work through when I was 6, 16, 26. All of the stuff that I didn't feel, that was too scary to feel, needed to be felt and worked through. And, we live in the age of Google and Pinterest and all of those things. So you can look up what the symptoms are for postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. And so I, at that time, was really big into Pinterest. So I would look on Pinterest and I found these graphics that had the symptoms side by side. And I was like, well, I kind of feel that, but it's more than that. That's not it exactly.
Yeah.
So I self-diagnosed, I guess, and decided that I didn't have, well, I mean, maybe I did a touch, but it wasn't the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I knew that I needed to learn how to regulate my nervous system. I needed to learn to uncover the beliefs that I had about myself that were holding me back and work through all of those layers so that I could flip the script and break the cycle.
I love that. I think what you're saying is so powerful and so many women deal with this. And they think it's postpartum depression, but it's not, and they don't really know how to handle. So now that you said like you kind of self-diagnosed, then what was your next step? Like, what tools did you use? What did you do not to get on medication, right? To obviously have another kid and have a happy marriage now. Like, what did that look like? What was the healing process for that?
So as I was navigating my infertility when I was trying to achieve pregnancy for my daughter, I did a lot of research and self-education around what my cycle was supposed to look like, what my hormones were supposed to be doing. And I started tracking my body, basal body temperature, cycles, all of that stuff, so that I would have data to back up what I was saying to my doctor.
Mm.
And eventually I moved from the mainstream OBGYN to a naturopath. And that transition helped me to understand how my female hormones were connected to the stress that I was experiencing and how my central nervous system works to regulate all of that, because your central nervous system does so much. It's not just it's very elaborate. So I did a lot of self-education around that. And then after my daughter was born, I dove into learning about how different modalities, essential oils, breathing, mindful breathing techniques, how that all factors into learning how to regulate your nervous system, how what you eat impacts how you're feeling. And then in 2020, after my son was born, I did a dual certification to become a health and life coach. And that was really informative as well, not just so that I have the tools to help others, but it was really informative for my own healing. So there's been a lot of stuff over the span of the last 4.5 years. Yeah.
That's so amazing. So what are some tools you can give our listeners? Maybe they're in the same situation, or maybe they're experiencing this. What can they start doing? Maybe a few tools to regulate the nervous system, or anything that really helped you that you think can help another woman listening.
The biggest thing I think that you can do is to strengthen your self-awareness muscle. So for me, I was taught as a child to numb out. So for me, when I began healing, I had to learn how to identify my emotions, because I didn't know what each emotion felt like exactly. And that sounds funny, but it's true. I also did not know how to breathe properly, which also sounds funny because I I made it to 29, 30, however old I was when I started this. So obviously I was breathing, but I was holding my breath a lot.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of work in creating an action plan for recognizing what emotion you're feeling. So if you're feeling triggered and you feel like you're going to blow your top, recognizing that you're feeling triggered and noticing what that feels like in your body, and then using a breathing practice to help to activate your sympathetic nervous system so that you don't snap and you have clarity of mind so that you can respond rather than react.
Got it. I love it. Well, if our listeners want to find you anywhere, where is a good place for them to go and learn more about you and what you do?
So you guys can find me on Instagram at emily.cleghorn.coach. You can also tune into my podcast. It's called Mamahood After Trauma, and we go live every Thursday afternoon on YouTube, and you can also find me on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Audible.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was such an honor, and I think your story is so powerful, and I know so many women will really connect to it. So thank you for being here. Thank you so
much for having me.
And thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Moms Talk Sex podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends, like, and support our community by joining our Facebook group, Moms Talk Sex, or follow us on Instagram at Morph Healing. If you're interested in being a guest on our show, send us an email. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next